Welcome to Macon Memories. Today is May the 26th, 2009, and I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today I'm here with Professors Ed Schmidt and Barry Pfitzner. Ed, I was wondering if you could tell us about how you first came to Randolph-Macon.
Sure. I was just finishing up a degree at the University of Maryland, and a notice came into the department that there was an opening at this place in Ashland, Virginia called Randolph-Macon College. Quite frankly, I never heard of it before, but that's okay. At the time, I could have taught at Prince George's Community College in Prince George's County, just outside D.C. And then this offer came in, and I had a debate. Gosh, I could stay in school and teach at the community college, or leave, teach for a few years, and then finish the PhD by coming to Randolph-Macon. I decided to come to Randolph-Macon. I think I needed a fresh start, get away from school for a while, and actually thought that by teaching I'd really learn the stuff more by teaching than just by doing what I was doing in graduate school. So I came down for an interview with Carl Baskin. Had trouble finding the place at first. I passed a lot of farms on the way out on Route 54. Finally turned around and got to Ashland. Carl was waiting for me, spelled out what courses I'd be teaching, and it just happened to match what Randolph-Macon needed at the time. So while he was gone, Kenneth McConnell was here. He had come the year before, planning on staying 2 years. So Carl was going to be away for 1 year. So I was taking Carl's place, and then when he came back, Ken McConnell would leave. Actually, he went to the University of Kentucky to get his PhD. So then it was Carl and I and Hunter Jones, who taught accounting at night. And that was in the fall of 1967. And that's how I got here and decided to stay. And they kept me.
Okay. I came here in the fall of 1982. I was finishing my dissertation at Catholic University. Applied to several colleges in Virginia, wanted to stay in Virginia, lived in Virginia while I was at CU, and RMC had an opening. Professor Schmidt and Baskin were the economists at Macon. There was a Professor Paul Bennett, who left, and I applied for that position. One of the questions on the script is, what was the process like? I don't think it was very different from what it's like today. This is 1982. I interviewed with the department. I did a class presentation. I interviewed with Dean Hendricks at the time, Elton Hendricks. I don't even know if I met with the president. I probably did, but I don't recall that. But the process was more or less what we do now. The makeup of the committee is probably different nowadays. You have people from different departments. But other than that, more or less what we do these days.
Yeah, the process. I met with Dr. Moreland, who was president at the time. Luther Wright was going to become president at the start of that semester. So I did meet with Dr. Moreland, and he asked me what religion I was. And I told him. He said, well, we have some of those here, too. A bunch of students from Baltimore. So you'll feel comfortable here. But I wasn't interviewed by anybody else, just Carl and Ken McConnell. And I guess the dean, Alec Mabry. Alec Mabry goes back years and years and years. And so that was pretty much that. And as far as a role model is concerned, I worked with Ken McConnell for the year. He was young, very young, well, like I was. We got along great. He lived in the small house adjacent to the tennis courts, and he'd invite me over for lunch every once in a while. Had a lot of fun together. In fact, we even shot pool in the old gym students weren't allowed to be in there until after 3, but he had a key. And so every once in a while we just shoot pool after our morning classes and had a great time.
For me, the department was basically Carl and Ed. We were on the second floor of Fox Hall, and all of the offices were on the street side of Fox Hall. The history department was up there at that time. I remember my first office was a very narrow corridor, and it had to have been an old office that was split in two. Bill Reinhardt was on the other side in the history department. Porter, Scanlon, George Oliver were all up there. And I do remember that on Friday afternoons, George Oliver would make whiskey sours and pop popcorn. And everybody on the second floor of Fox would go down to his office, eat popcorn, and drink whiskey sours.
There were some issues that the faculty was facing when I got here. It was the faculty debated a new curriculum. Vietnam was a big issue, and there were students who were upset with the faculty for not allowing final exams to be canceled. And coeducation was a topic of interest because the budget, well, the college wasn't doing very well. It had budget deficits for quite a number of years, and they had to do something to get the college back into the black. And I do remember one of the first female students was a Susan Yap from Singapore. And she's gone back to Singapore. But she made a lasting impression on me and the department. She's quite accomplished.
Another question that we've often been asked is, what was your classroom like when you came there? Honestly, my classrooms, which were primarily in Fox, are really no different than they were then, other than the technology. Down on the first floor we have whiteboards and we have computers, and every classroom now has access to computers. But other than that, the classroom space has not changed very much. So that has not been a huge change. When I came, 82, 84, was the last really big recession we had until now. So that was a period where the college was worried about, faculty were worried about raises, and it was a very inflationary period too. That was when Volcker came in and reduced the rate of inflation from something like 13% down to under 4% within about 4 years. But the result of that was deepest recession we'd had in the post-war era. Until now, we've managed to beat that little record.
Yeah, if I remember, unemployment got to between 9 and 10.
It did. It hit 10%.
It hit 10.
Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, how did that recession affect your time at Randolph Macon, your teaching, or the students you recall?
Well, it's interesting because I think that interest in economics in general, and particularly macroeconomics, peaks during more difficult economic times. So I just taught a macro class this spring, and they seemed to be very interested in what was going on, what policies we were using to attempt to reduce the severity of the current recession. And I think that was also true back then. Of course, I hadn't taught here for the previous 10 years, so it would have been hard for me to make a comparison. But, we had lots of majors in that period of time. I know at one time we had 1/3 of the majors in the college, and I know we had a substantial proportion at that time.
It may not quite be that high now, but it's still the largest. And I've taught macro for a number of years, and what Barry says is true. Whenever there's a recession, there seems to be some renewed interest, and students do a little bit more when it comes to getting a job. because they know it's going to be tough. It really is going to be tough. Last spring, I was in a money banking class, but I only had so few students in it, but the two that were there were really quite interested in the problems that the banks were facing and how many were, about to go under, except for being saved by the bailout. And so whenever you see that, you get renewed interest as well. As Barry said, we've grown over the years. So when I started, we had 2 full-time, and as I mentioned before, Hunter Jones was the adjunct, but now we have 7 full-time, but really 8. I mean, we count Professor Woodward as full-time, although he's maybe 1 or 2 courses short. But 8, and then now I guess we have 2 adjunct, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't always have an adjunct professor. We just happen to have an opportunity to have that this year. So we've grown, just as psychology has grown over the years. Oh, they've become quite large. Who else are some bigger ones?
Well, it's just since I've been here, there's been a proliferation in the number of majors, the number of departments, and I mean not majors in the department, but number of different majors that a student can choose. So that's been a substantial change at the college. I guess inside the department, the economics and business major and the accounting major were significant changes over the years, and we now have a lot of accounting majors, and I suspect that will continue to grow. There's a question about someone asked about technology and how that's changed the way you teach, and that's been a huge change from when I first came here. When I came here in 1982, the methods that I used for my dissertation work required a mainframe program, computer mainframe, if anybody knows what that means. That was very expensive, and the college didn't own. So the kind of work that I was doing prior to coming here, I couldn't do when I first came here. But within less than a year, there was a computer initiative on campus. We began to get micros, and within a year, I could do on my desktop what would have taken overnight to do just a year before on a mainframe computer. That was a huge change, and being able to integrate microcomputers into all my quantitative classes. I teach advanced statistics, I teach econometrics, I teach time series forecasting, and all 3 of those courses make significant use of microcomputer technology and statistical packages that just weren't available at this college at that time.
And it's my understanding we were able to get those computers from there's a grant from the Olin Foundation. We really wanted a new building to replace Fox and perhaps Haley Hall, and applied to the Olin Foundation and thought we were going to get it, but we didn't. So we got computers. They gave us enough to buy computers. I think that was the booby prize. But it turned out to be quite beneficial. The campus life, I look at things a little funny here, because campus life back then, there wasn't much to do. It was all male. There wasn't much to do on weekends, so a lot of the students just took off. Though when there was a football game here, they all dressed up in suits, jackets, and ties. Girls dressed to kill. You don't do that anymore, but that was true all over the place. Quite different now. And one of our professors has a no flip-flop rule. Can't wear flip-flops to class. That's Professor Bratt. I've got to get his name in there. Students laugh at him for that.
I honestly would say between 82 and now that campus life, as I remember it, again, I was not here before we were coeducational, is more or less the same. There were fewer rules in those days for some obvious reason. The change in the drinking age was a big thing that required additional rules at the college. And I think that was fully implemented in '87, I believe, for Virginia, which meant different liabilities for the college and therefore more rules, although we haven't stopped putting in more rules since '87 or so. But the students, what campus life was like was more or less the same. They have more things to do today. They have more distractions than they did then. But other than that, I think things were not terribly different when I first came here.
There's an issue about, or a question about the tenure process that faculty go through. And I have to mention that it was so different way back when I was awarded tenure, because back then I didn't, so to speak, have to submit anything to anybody to be awarded tenure. Someone, I guess a committee met, and Carl Baskin let me know, okay, Ed, you've got tenure, and President Wright will send you a letter. You have that 1 year probationary period, and then you've got tenure. They've agreed that you're good enough to stay. And at the time, I really didn't know anything about tenure, but I remember asking Carl, well, you know, if I don't get tenure, can I still stay? That's how naive I was. And he said, well, that would only be year to year. That's the best you could count on. And I said, well, okay, I can deal with that. And then, but these days, oh my goodness, what's required of submissions of, well, I couldn't tell you everything that has to be submitted. I don't know. But Barry could probably tell you.
I do know. In fact, I've served 2 terms as chair of the committee on the faculty. When I came in '82, my requirements were really the same as they are today. The faculty handbook on promotion and tenure has not changed since then. Again, things were different back when Ed first came here. But I was required to have letters. I was required to submit a portfolio. And there was the 6-year probationary period, same as it is now. You had to excel in all 3 areas, that is to say teaching, which is number 1, service to the college, and professional activity. And I've also seen all the files. As chair, you do see all the committee on the faculty files. And the process was more or less the same as it is today. You know, the emphasis may be slightly different, but the criteria and the process itself are more or less the same as they were when I came here, or at least when I was tenured, which I think would have been '88. That math is correct.
Some watershed events in the life of the college during my time. One of the biggest things was getting air conditioning in the classrooms. Oh, that really was a watershed. Instead of water dripping from one's forehead during class, you get sometimes water dripping from the air conditioning units. But anyway, a much larger endowment for the college, I think, has saved this place. And a lot of new buildings, through the generosity of a whole large number of people, have made this college much prettier, a much more comfortable place to teach in, a much more comfortable place to study in. I mean, additions to the library. We did have a new science building. It's not so new anymore, but it's going to be, under the strategic plan, renovated and an addition to it made. But we have new dormitories, relatively new dormitories. The freshman village, all of those things have made, I think, quite a difference. Quite a difference.
And we still have Fox Hall.
But we still have Fox and Haley Hall. and of course, the Brock Center has made a difference. Mm-hmm. Oh, gosh, yes. That's one of the things students look at. What have they got for me here? They're looking at more stuff outside of a classroom. And thank goodness we have it.
I guess in my time, the buildings are obviously unimportant additions. The introduction of computers, and that was a big thing. Again, microcomputers were just coming to the fore in the early 80s. As I mentioned before, the change in the drinking age. The things that I'll remember is the snipers, the hurricane, 9/11, and the new curriculum.
Right.
The most recent one.
And when you say hurricane, which hurricane do you mean? Isabel?
Isabel.
Oh, there are a couple.
There were a couple, but that one closed the college for...
Gaston was terrible.
Uh-huh.
Isabel. I can't remember the names of the other ones. Trees were down all over the campus, though. One even crushed what was called the German House, which is now a parking lot, across the railroad tracks. North of the tennis courts. A huge house. They called the German House. A tree landed on it, and that had to go. And from what I understand, English Construction Company provided some cranes to get these trees out of here when cranes were in short supply. And so English did quite a job for us. Some people have mentioned they always see me at the during basketball games working the clock. And it hadn't always been usually students have done that, and I believe they get paid. Faculty do not. And how I got involved was I've always played on the intramural faculty volleyball team, basketball team. We even had softball, basketball, volleyball. Students even asked me years and years ago to play on a intramural softball team. I did that, loved it. And I played golf a couple of times with Jeff Burns and Helmut Werner. So they knew I was interested in athletics. So I went to a lot of the games. And so Jeff Burns asked me one day that they needed help at the scorer's table for basketball tournaments. Students were gone, so they needed help. He asked me if I'd like to do that. I said, well, absolutely. Get a front row seat, work the clock, and have a great time. So I've been doing it for a number of years, and I just love doing it. It's terrific. And Barry's been involved in sports here too with the golf team.
I have. Early on, before my son was born, who's now 23, I assisted Ted Keller as assistant coach of the golf team and went on a bunch of their trips and helped out the kids. One of the most interesting memories that I have is when Ted had a hip operation. Mike Breed, who's now a very famous TV star, he's on the Golf Channel and has his own show, but he's a graduate of Macon. It's called The Golf Fix, which you catch Monday nights at 8 o'clock. Anyway, Mike and I were co-assistants and took the team to the ODAC championships. And we were supposedly supervising those kids. Let's say we didn't win the tournament, but we had a lot of fun. So it was a good time. But I still talk to Mike. I spoke to him just the other day in his office, even though he's a major TV star. He still keeps up with Macon. He's a good guy.
Those were some of the really good times. There were some other times here where we've had some issues. And the first couple of years here, the faculty had a collective bargaining election, which it lost. But the faculty was very dissatisfied with the way things were going. There were budget deficits, and there were people being laid off because the budget was so tight. And so it had this election, and I remember President Wright meeting with each faculty member and discussing the issue with them in their office. They didn't go to his office. He came to each faculty member and to explain his side of the story, the college's administration's side of the issue. And although the faculty lost the election, they wanted the AAUP to serve as the collective bargaining agent. It did set in motion, I believe, some changes, that the faculty became much more involved in governance of the college, so that it has a greater role in curriculum development, and the regulations, the budgeting process, the planning process, and that sort of thing, which I think has proved to be quite beneficial over the years. And maybe it took that election to get things started. Don't know for sure, but that's the way I see it anyway. Not that people were so opposed to Luther Wright. That's not the case. He came at a very, very difficult time and did absolutely the best he could. And in fact, I played senior basketball with his son Luther. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there any AAUP presence on campus before the collective bargaining? You're talking about like sort of 1969-ish, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I know now there's a chapter here.
Yeah, I don't know when that chapter started.
Okay, I was just wondering. That's what was the outcome of that.
If someone was in charge, it probably was a history professor by the name of Jerry Bledsoe. I think he would have been the one who would have started an AAUP chapter on campus. So that would have been the only. I think that would have been the only group that would have. The faculty would have wanted to serve as its collective bargaining agent. I'm not aware of any other one, like a National Education of Teachers or something like that. I'm just not aware of that at all.
So the development of the current faculty governance system, the way it is now, sort of goes back to around that time.
They had some faculty governance before that, but see, when I came, Dr. Moreland had been president. I think he pretty much ruled the roost,
Right.
and what he said went, or what he said goes. Faculty were different. The new faculty members sometimes were referred to as the Young Turks. Activists, a few anyway. Some of them, well, most of them aren't here anymore. Heck, I'm the only one left from those days, so I was not a Young Turk, that's for sure.
Do you have any memories of the governance system changing, or during your time? Or?
During my time, it's been more or less the same.
This is what
I think. See, Ed was a part of the revolution. I missed going co-ed. I missed the whole collective bargaining vote. I missed the change in the faculty governance systems. So all that came before my time.
So it sounds like all that sort of was set in place between the time you came and sort of in the 70s. That sort of developed, and it's been set, and with some tweaking has stayed more or less the same.
Right.
I think so.
Good.
Somewhere on this list of questions asks me to sum up my years at Randolph-Macon College. I will say that I look back on my time here with a great deal of satisfaction. I enjoy going to work every day, still enjoy the classroom, still enjoy the research, like my colleagues. It's the kind of school at which I wish to teach, so I ended up doing almost exactly what I wanted to do. I remember sitting as a junior in economics class, looked up at the front of the room, said, "That looks like an easy touch to me. I think I'll do that." And more or less ended up doing what I expected to do.
Well, that's funny because I agree with everything you said, and I can remember an undergraduate school, taking some classes and saying, damn, I could explain that better than he could. Maybe that's what I ought to do. And so came to Randolph-Macon. At the time, I mentioned before, I looked elsewhere, but this was the place that hired me, and it's I can't see myself anywhere else. Absolutely cannot see myself anywhere else. No large state school, and I'm certainly not qualified to be at Harvard or any other place like that. I mean, I know that. I'm very thankful that the college has allowed me to stay here as long as I have, and plan on being here a few more years to come. It's been a wonderful experience. I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Hope I've made a contribution to a number of students' lives.
Any other memories or stories, reflections?
Well, some funny ones.
Yeah,
Playing softball. I was on a faculty softball team years ago, playing shortstop. Allison O'Brien was playing second base. There was a man on first. Ground ball to Schmidt at short. Sidearmed it to Allison. Off the tip of her glove, boom, right in the middle of her forehead. She had a lump for weeks. And wouldn't you know it, just a few years ago, the same thing happened again, except I was pitching. Someone hits a ground ball to the pitcher, and Janice Cooper's the catcher. So there was a play at the plate. I threw her a pitch. Well, it wasn't a pitch. I threw the ground ball back to Janice off the tip of her glove, got her in the forehead, boom. She was out for a while, too. Not knocked unconscious, but she had a lump right in the middle of her forehead for weeks. And so, I mean, it's not funny. It wasn't funny then, but when you look back on it, that was funny. And
I don't think I have any stories where I've injured any of my teammates. I'm sure it's happened, but I've managed to forget them all.
Do you have any comparisons between the current financial challenges the college is in, and you mentioned some difficult financial times when you came, and then the recession? I mean, or do you see any parallels where we are now, or are we just in a very different place to handle those challenges?
I believe we're better able to handle it now, but it depends on how long this recession goes and how much that endowment suffers. I mean, we were really in deep trouble back in the late 60s and early 70s. Budget deficit, the accumulated budget deficit had been $1 million, and they had to go to the bank and borrow that kind of money and at expensive interest rates, high interest rates. We're in a better position now, but still, it's going to be tough getting students here, given the financial aid requirements that we have, and that takes a chunk of change out, and still so dependent on tuition revenues that it'd be nice if we could increase that endowment to a sizable sum.
The two recessions, interestingly, we were talking about this in the department the other day, and the only parallel I can draw between the 82-84 recession and the current one is they were both financial in nature. One was contrived because the Fed decided they were going to wring inflation out of the economy and drove interest rates to record levels, but it was financial in nature. And this one, at least its aegis, was financial in nature. So I think those two parallels fit. On the other hand, the inflation rate has not been at all out of control during this period of time, but very much a credit crunch, and when economic times are difficult, places like Randolph-Macon College have a hard time. community colleges, if you follow the newspaper, actually do better
Yeah.
during recessions. But expensive private schools tend to do significantly worse. And this is a time where we're attempting to think about becoming bigger as a college, an increase in enrollment. That would be very difficult to do in the next 3 or 4 years, I would guess.
Well, I hate to end on that note, so do you want to have any? You tell us one more funny story, Ed. So we'll end on a good.
I'd
good
have to
memory.
think about. There's nothing that's popping into my head. Oh, I'm sure there've been a bunch, but I can't think of any at the moment.
Any classroom story? Anything happen crazy in the classroom? Something go terribly wrong or really right?
Trying to think. There are some funny stories, but I'm not willing to share some of those. I don't have anything.
I can't think of any.
Thank you very much for sharing your memories with us today and your insights, and thank you very much.
Thank you.